Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix. This is Chapter 6 of Micronation, Mememaster. So, the Jimmy Hoffa Memorial Prison was now my home. This prison is where they make people who know too much disappear. The funny thing about a prison full of people who know too much was that they had a lot of idle time on their hands. Most people are now well aware of the kinds of things that go on in a regular prison. I don't need to tell you the sordid details there. Some of those kind of things went on here. But the main activities consisted of sharing hidden information about conducting experiments. The experiments are the more relevant part of my story. Specifically, about a quarter of the inmate population consisted of what one might call mad scientists. When one of them comes up with an experiment that the government considers particularly interesting, some governmental agency, quite often the military, steps in and sponsors it. Very often, these experiments require volunteers, but it was a well-known fact that they were also an excellent way to reduce time served. I had as much motive to get out of here as quickly as the next guy. "Attention, volunteers," the extremely thinly disembodied voice in the ceiling said. "Thank you for asking to be part of this experiment. We are very enthusiastic to have you. Please step out of your cell and follow the lighted sections of the floor to the designated lab area." At this point, the door to my cell swung open, and I did as the voice commanded. You did a lot of that in prison. This place was not as bad as the typical prison was supposed to be. To begin with, I had my own cell, as did most people. Apparently, disappeared people were not in such high demand that they couldn't spare the space. At least not in my particular category of disappeared people anyway. After a few minutes, I arrived outside a large plexiglass door with 2 guards and about a dozen other inmates. Half of them were female. Why didn't someone tell me that there were females here? Now that Darla was getting married, I needed to find a new object of my affections. My eye immediately caught on a really hot blonde number. She was stacked in all the right places, and unstacked in other places. Fine. She was very physically attractive. Better. She smiled and looked at me. Granted, those two things did not occur at the same time, but she did smile, and she did look at me. A guy came out. He had black hair and black eyes, but obviously hadn't seen the sun in a month. He howled some kind of generic greeting and then got on with his technobabble. "We're going to be working with memetics. Do any of you know what that is?" Wait a second. I knew what memetics were. I'd run into this case before. I'd made a complete fool of myself before I realized what I was doing. I raised my hand. "Terribly sorry. Unaware of the nature of the experiment. I'd like to unvolunteer, please." I smiled in as good a nature as I could manage. This was neither easy nor effective, since I am by nature an extremely cynical person. The scientist looked at me with evident disdain and said, "Request denied. However, since you obviously know what memetics are, why don't you enlighten the group?" I said, "What do you mean, request denied? These are supposed to be voluntary experiments. Memes are pernicious little things that could get inside your head and mess you up like a subliminal advertising, only they're contagious." My reaction made most of the group nervous, though a few of them snickered in disbelief. Most of these people were newbies to our little prison and were wholly unaware of the advances that the underground technology community had actually achieved. They'd find out soon enough. The scientist smiled and ignored the reaction from the rest of the group. "That's right! That's exactly what we're going to be exploring today. But don't worry, memes are completely harmless when you know what to look for. Why, look at how fast the rest of you fell for our meme about being afraid of memes!" The crowd was genuinely confused at this point when I felt the cold metal of a gun pointed in the back of my neck and a tiny voice whisper in my ear, "You're going to pretend that you're merely an actor going along with the experiment, or your brains will be splattered all over the floor." Now, I'm not stupid. Normally, if somebody told me something like that, my first reaction would be to drop to the floor, kick their legs from underneath them, scream the exact opposite of what they wanted me to do, and run. That might sound stupid, but think about it. Anyone being subtle like that doesn't want to attract attention, and anyone that is going to point a gun at you like that is generally not going to have your best interest at heart. Unfortunately, none of my clever thinking on this did any good here. They could just move me to a nice quiet room and then shoot me. I mean, we were in a secret prison anyway. I thought it couldn't get much worse than that. While I am not stupid, that does not stop me from doing stupid things like thinking, at least it can't get any worse. So I went along. I laughed unconvincingly. Yep, gotcha. Memes are harmless. This is going to be fun. Most of them seemed to believe it. I wasn't exactly going to win an Academy Award, but I also figured out that most of these people were a few crayons short of a box. The blonde didn't believe it, though. She looked at me extremely suspiciously. Apparently, I had a thing for intelligent, physically attractive females that loathed me. We all went into an area with the host scientist. There were several couches set up with goggles and headphones. They were all hooked to several PlayStation controls. The guy began to speak again. The first thing we are going to do is find out a bit more about what makes each of you tick. Now, I know you've been all taking extensive tests when you arrived here, but this is a bit more specific to what we're looking for. So, if you'll begin by putting on the headphones and goggles, then we'll get started. You'll notice this visual display will urge you to push a specific button. The goggles are a mixture of a flat screen TV and VR gear, so you'll be able to see the buttons as you push them. Any questions? One of the others that hadn't panicked, but obviously hadn't believed my performance, raised his hand. Yeah, what happens after we're done with the test? The host scientist smiled. That depends entirely on the results. I didn't like the sound of that. It always took time. It didn't take as much time as you might think, but it wasn't an overnight thing. At first, they just sat there watching the television and playing a video game, which was occasionally interrupted by a burst of light, sounds, smells, and images. I was somewhat relieved when they pulled me out of the rig after the first week to begin acting as an assistant. My primary duty was to watch what the others were doing and take notes. I was eventually allowed to ask them questions. At the time, I had my suspicions, and those turned out to be correct. I knew what memes were, and I had absolutely determined not to let them influence me a second time. It was an important choice because apparently they couldn't affect me when I wouldn't let them, but they acted like cookies for the computer in my mind. You had to keep clicking no on the accept buttons no matter how many times it asked. It was a royal pain in the neck, let me tell you. I had to be careful with absolutely every action I took to ask myself if it were the result of something I wanted to do or something I simply felt like doing for no particular reason. I didn't have a good reason to do it. If I didn't have a good reason to do it, I didn't. The good part of being an assistant was that I was able to find out the name of the hot blonde. Her name was Kim. I liked the name. I admit I liked the body more, but it wasn't like I had an opportunity to be engaged in a regular conversation, an extremely stimulating conversation with her. I liked her, and because I liked her, I felt protective of her. Because I felt protective of her, it bothered me when I saw her put on those goggles. Heaven only knew what they were filling her mind with. Things started to change by the 7th week. They all began to act a lot more docile. They seemed to like it when people told them what to do. Prisoners are surprisingly brilliant in some ways, and it didn't take the others long to figure out what the situation was here. The only thing that was at least some comfort was the fact that there was literally no privacy in the space, which means that certain typical prison activities did not occur, but I was not naive. Sooner or later, even that would be on the table. What the scientists did do was subject the volunteers, in quotes, to the most humiliating tasks. The fact of the matter was, most of the victims knew something was wrong, but found themselves almost always unable to say no to someone telling them what to do. They had all different levels of strength, but the longer the program went on, the more of them buckled. It started to get really bad. It didn't help when the prison warden deliberately allowed the male and female prisoners to begin mixing. It was strictly casual and in the good nature of good relations, in quotes, but I could tell it was just the next phase of the experiment. I wasn't happy about it at all. The other prisoners just kept away from me. I tried to warn them at first, and now they regretted not listening to me. That, or, quite frankly, they thought I was in on the whole thing. Not that I could blame them. So when I saw an entirely changed and extremely shy Kim come up to me, I didn't know what to think. I'd just been sitting there, disgusted at human nature. And she sat down next to me on one of the cafeteria benches. She looked at me, sitting there quietly for a while until she finally spoke. How come it didn't affect you? Were you just faking the whole time? I hate this. They make me do things, she shuddered. I almost felt something bordering on compassion then, though it was hard to make that out amongst my obvious lusts. Here was a girl who would do whatever I could tell her to do. There were obvious limitations, of course, primarily the guards with the submachine guns that surrounded the room, but that still left all kinds of possibilities. Somehow, I'm still not entirely sure how, I said, I simply chose to stop letting them affect me. I had it happen once, and I was absolutely determined not to let it again. She said, I'd give anything for you to be able to teach me how to do that. Being the rampant and evil opportunistic bastard that I am, I said, anything? Yes, you name it. Technically, I could just ask you to do it anyway. She looked crestfallen. Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought of that. There it was again. I'm supposed to be a sociopathic evil bad guy. I tried to ruin the life of one Quiescence Prow and one Darla, after all, which was why I was in here. If I was going to be the bad guy, should be a complete bad guy. It didn't help. I rolled my eyes and finally said, look, you have to find something to live for, something deep down inside of you that makes you define who you are and what it is you want to be. Once you know who you are, the memes can't do much to you. Is that all? Hey, it's a lot harder than it sounds. I'll just live to make the world a better place. And you actually believe that crap you're spouting? I said incredulously. Not really, no. The world sucks. I doubt I can make it any better. What do you live for? Screwing one Quiescence Prow. Who? She asked. He's a jerk. That's all you need to know. Look, you need something. Then think about this. That scientist, the one who's doing all this to you, focus on getting revenge on him. I don't think that'll work, she sighed. Why not? I'm not a revenge kind of person. What do you mean you're not a revenge type of person? You're a convicted felon. How could you not be a revenge type of person? They put me in here because I knew about the general's affairs and he threatened to tell his wife. What? I said. Why is that so shocking? That's why most people are in here. Why? What did you do? I tried to ruin a few lives. I couldn't believe she was saying this. Well, that's what I tried to do. Really? I felt slightly better. What? Did you try blackmailing him or something? Well, no, but he asked me nicely to please not tell his wife. And somehow you think this was justifiable behavior. Well, she hesitated. I couldn't believe this. In retrospect, what I did next was probably the wrong idea. I automatically assumed that this passivity was the result of the conditioning that she had been under for the last several hours. Even if I had been right, and I'm pretty sure now I was wrong, what I did next was a pretty stupid idea. All right, that's enough of this, Kim. She looked at me expectantly. I continued to speak at her, looking directly into her eyes. From now on, I am ordering you to ignore the memes that they are feeding you. You're going to have something to live for, and the thing that you're going to live for is the fact that I am ordering you to have something to live for, and to ignore the treatment they are giving you. Do you understand? She gave a blank look on her face for a split second, trying to understand what I was saying then, and then lit up like a sunbeam. Of course, it was so obvious. Why didn't I think of it? Thank you. What was your name again? Chester, I replied. Chester Arthurson. She repeated my name like it was a holy thing. She said it over and over again like a mantra. It was at this point that I realized I might have done something wrong. I said, look, just relax, okay? She smiled at me. Okay, Chester. So the experiments resumed. After a while, the jerks running the show must have gotten sick of the constant abuse by the other inmates toward each other. Either that or they had gotten all the data they needed. What really disturbed me were the injections. Were they using drugs to enhance the process now? After about 3 days of this, I approached the scientist in charge. I suppose I should have tried to find out more about him before, but for some reason I felt I just had wanted to avoid him as much as possible, and if I did, everything would be fine. Obviously, I'd been wrong. What are you doing to them? I asked. Well, I think it should be obvious to someone with your knowledge, he said. Nope, afraid not. I'm totally in the dark here. We're giving them narcolepsy. Well, I was wrong. I did know stuff. I knew too much stuff. I knew that narcoleptics were natural leaders beyond compare unless they had the biochemical process eliminated inside their head that made them sleep. Narcoleptics were the reason we had any free will at all. Nature had developed them to sweep up all the excess memes floating around in our society until someone decided to cure them. I had thought the problem taken care of, but I guess no one thought that they might try and make more narcoleptics and then cure them. Do you have a name? I said. Call me Boss, he said. Really, Boss. That's so original. Really. You go with that. Thanks, Boss said. I feel it properly conveys a sense of empowerment. So, is there any particular reason you're doing all this? So is there any particular reason you're doing all this? So glad you asked, he said. I knew immediately that this was a mistake. Had I learned nothing? He said, I plan to be a god. I shall unlock the human potential of persuasion, and all shall bow down before me. Don't gods, usually have supernatural powers and things like that? You don't understand mimetic mind control to be enough? Hardly. Anyone who is paying attention can overcome them, he smiled. Hardly. Don't you think that most of these people have been trying to resist? I don't know exactly why it can't affect you, but it's been helpful to have you as a sort of control group anyway. I'm not an expert, but isn't that really sloppy science? Yes, but this isn't exactly science. It's more like a calibration and a refinement of skill. After all, thanks to your friends, we already know the technique works. First of all, they are not my friends. Second, I don't know what you hope to accomplish by doing all this, but do you honestly think you can get away with it? Get away with what? World domination, I said with the last bit of only a slight sarcasm. Only slight, really. Interesting idea. I considered it, but no, I meant actual godhood. Just because people worship you doesn't make you a god, I said. That largely depends on your perspective. I mean, I don't expect any powers in this life, to be sure, but I consider myself a pragmatic agnostic. I don't know whether or not the supernatural is real, but I can enjoy myself while I'm here, which this allows me to do. More importantly, by sheer numbers, the majority of ancient civilizations seem to ascribe to the belief that honorific titles, temples, and monuments in this life somehow convey power in the next. Thus, if that's true, and given empirical observation, how can you really tell one religion from another? Then I'm essentially securing godhood for myself in the life to come. Simple as pie. Is pie really that simple? I asked. It is if you know how to cook, Boss replied. Touché. Danke. Now, why don't you go finish recording conversations with the people over there? That pretty much ended the conversation. I went over and began examining the people in their chairs like he asked. They weren't doing well. The stuff he was injecting into them was either lowering their resistances or making it worse. I couldn't tell. I wished I were a psychologist or a scientist, but I wasn't. I kept trying to think of a way to do something. But I had no one to report it to. There were no appeals committees, no lawyers, no real correspondence of any kind. I learned a better appreciation of what hell was like that day. Things began to get worse. After about a week of injections, the other prisoners began to act weird. Bear in mind that this new bunch of victims never received any injections at all. They were merely queuing off the memes being distributed by the core group. It started out pretty random, such as odd word usage or little behavioral quirks like looking right but not left when they were going through a door. This started to get more blatant, though, with more and more people talking about how great Boss was. There were a few exceptions. About half the guards didn't seem affected by it. It didn't seem to do anything to me, and Kim was just fine. Well, let me rephrase that. Kim seemed mostly fine, except she became more and more devoted to me. Well, normally I wouldn't be opposed to such a thing. The knowledge that it was the memes and not my person just made her advances repulsive to me. I kept trying to think of something to do. The guards didn't seem worried in the slightest. In fact, even when I pointed out to the other guards who were talking so nicely about Boss, and that half their number were affected by this, was not enough to make them do anything about it. Finally, I grew desperate. The oldest trick in the book was to feign illness, but here they were sophisticated enough so that the infirmary would be able to handle or detect anything fake, which means I had to hurt myself, and badly. I took time figuring out exactly how to do it. It had to hurt and be important enough to ship me out of the compound, but it couldn't risk any kind of permanent damage. Finding something serious enough to get me out of here proved to be more of a challenge than I thought it was, and I finally decided to get really exotic and poison myself. I was going to get myself bitten by a black widow I found in one of the biology labs next to Boss's workstation. They did all kinds of things here. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of assuming that Kim's loyalty to me included obedience. I attempted to co-opt her into my plans, but she immediately reported me to the guards, who had me locked up in solitary confinement. Kim later slipped me a note that said it was for my own good, and that she loved me. And so time passed. I couldn't exactly keep track of much while I was in the featureless cell, but I could hear noises outside and down the hall. Things seemed to continue for a while out along the same normal/abnormal pattern, but again the chanting began. The way the sound echoed inside my cell, it sounded like hundreds, nay thousands. But I knew that there weren't that many people in the whole complex. I couldn't hear what they were chanting, but it almost sounded like a hymn. The human imagination is a wicked thing. It can often come up with circumstances that are direr than they actually are in anything in reality. The activities occurring outside were mysterious and unknown, but I also knew that they were sinister and seductive. There was a tiny part of me that wanted to take part in all that, but I squelched it with an iron fist. I would not give in to the memes. not ever. More time passed, and eventually the chanting died away. I couldn't say how long it was, but eventually there was a feeble knock on the door. Instantly, I knew it had to be Kim. Who else would be stupid enough to knock on a door that could only be opened from that side? "What do you want?" I said through the door. "I need your help." She sounded disturbingly timid, even for her. "Right. Well, not that surprising, really. Let me guess. Boss has taken over the prison now, and now he's doing something so horribly it's entirely beyond imagining and has to be stopped." The door opened, and a bright light shone in my eyes. While the cell had not been pitch black, the light had been so reduced for so long it would have taken me some time to adjust. Kim, the outline I presumed stood at the door, reached forward with her hand and placed a gun in my open palm. I asked, "I suppose I'm supposed to use this to help take down Boss?" "Yes," she replied. Gee, she was particularly verbose today. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, and a part of me that just saw raw betrayal, first quiescence prow, and second by Kim. In the end, I suppose she couldn't help the fact that she was an idiot, and much to my surprise, I forgave her. Sort of. "Kim, I can't see well. How long do we have?" 5 minutes. 5 minutes? I shouted to the top of my lungs. "How long have you known about whatever it is he plans to do?" "About a week." "Great," I replied, "just great. Why did you wait so long?" "I didn't want to give you a chance to hurt yourself." "I couldn't hurt myself inside my cell. If you'd given me time to plan, I might have been able to think of something." I didn't trust the sudden shift in her priorities. It seemed very contrived. Oh, yes. Kim was just brilliant. I followed Kim running around the corner until the thought occurred to me that this too might be a bad idea. Then I knew it was a bad idea. We turned around the corner and saw Boss sitting atop a pile of human bodies. I could tell that most of them were still alive, but I doubted some of them could breathe there underneath the horde. Boss had made a throne of people who sat frozen in place. "Hello, Yertle!" "Shoot him!" Kim shouted. I was going to shoot, I really was, but I had that annoying conscience. I knew that if I shot Boss, the boss would go right through him and hit some of the people behind him. Kim ignored and shot him anyway, throwing random bric-a-brac from around the room. Boss chuckled and clapped as parts of his thrones collapsed to the ground. "Well done, Kim, well done. It's a shame you were only partially immune to me, but you tried valiantly. I told you. You cannot harm me. Now, kneel." Kim began to cry as she kneeled. This was nuts. These meme things were never that powerful or blatant. "Ah, Arthurson, how little you know about the way the human mind works. The more people follow me, the more others are inclined to obey. The conscious mind is but a small part of the brain. There are vast and unimaginable wastelands to be explored. I believe I have finally figured out how you remain immune to my abilities." "And that is?" I asked. "One of your two narcoleptic friends, the one in love with you, Amberlove. Her instructions protected you somehow, but I can change that now. Pretty soon you will not be immune to my effects either. Grab him!" I guess the fact that he planned to do to me what everyone else in the pyramid was now suffering was enough to remove any moral complications. Unfortunately, I was a terrible shot, which means I had about 5 other people while I unloaded the clip into him. I suppose I should have been some kind of hero and waited until the last moment, or come up to him and be some clever method of delivering him. But I wasn't quiescence prow. The universe didn't like me. It hated me. Boss died a surprisingly ignoble death. I hit him in the throat, and he bled onto the floor. His slaves grabbed me and held me for about 8 hours before their tired and sore muscles forced them to let go. Eventually, they went to sleep. When they woke up, I could tell that they were having trouble remembering most of it. Kim seemed to know more about what had gone on when I had been out of the box, but she didn't talk about it. Then again, Kim still seemed to be using the memes as an excuse to worship me. I must say that I found this particular trait extremely unattractive in a female. That didn't stop her from trying to get my interest or win my blessings all the time. I decided to do something about it after all. I wrote this story and plastered it around the prison. I'm going to serve my time. I saved all your hides, so the least you can do is leave me alone, and don't ask me any more stupid questions about what happened or why did I do that again. If you need to know it again, read this story, and hopefully it will keep you from being quite so stupid the second time. As for me, I'm going to pick up a good book, maybe a stack of them. I'm not a perfect man, I'm not a hero, but at least I have the sense not to fall for what everyone else is saying or doing just because, even if I had to have a subliminal command to do it.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the secret commentary at the end of every chapter of Micronation. This is chapter 6 commentary. So, what to say about this chapter? It's the first of the chapters written exclusively for the novel. I did still feel the need, for reasons I don't fathom, to include information that the reader already had about narcolepsy and memes. Which I guess, if you're going with the found document, Chester writing stories angle isn't entirely bad. But again, if I did this and edited it and rewrote parts of it, all of that redundant crap would be gone. There's no need to beat the reader over the head with information that they've already been given, especially when the first half is supposed to be kind of a mystery. I think that, ironically, if I compared this one as a short story to the first 5 chapters, I would put this at a solid second. The other meme chapter, chapter 3, was the most self-contained and reasonable chapter. The dog chapter was just stupid. The cockroach chapter was definitely the worst of them. Pretty good writing, good dialogue, interesting characters. If every chapter was as strong as this, I would actually probably try and salvage this for print. It is not, every chapter is not as good as this. As I've mentioned in other commentaries, which you may or may not have read, the meme/narcolepsy science is completely ridiculous and does not hold up. The only thing more ridiculous is a dog that can smell radiation. I have to say, not a lot of commentary on this chapter. I do enjoy hypnosis erotica, and you saw a little bit of that in this with Kim. I don't remember exactly what's going to happen later in chapters with Kim, but I know that Kim is a problematic character and shows how kind of a goofus that Chester is. Suffice to say that I think, to me, the most interesting thing about this is sooner or later we will have neural interface, and sooner or later that technology will permeate society, and it might not be memetics that does it, but the government, or even somebody working for the government, is sooner or later, or at least even if it's not the United States government, a government would love to have the ability to control the thoughts of its people. And so, as we start talking about things like digital intelligence or mind-machine interface, which I went over in the Sins of Silicon Valley series, I wrote about technology early in my career. Even when I write about fantasy, I tend to write about the technology culture and constructs and the concept of intelligence and what does intelligence mean and what does life and the soul mean. And that's kind of a theme in my works. And, here you see the danger of mind control technology getting in the hands of the wrong person. And I think that, there's lots of stories that do that. The thing I do like about this chapter is, somebody would use it to become a god. I mean, if you read about the mentality that goes through the minds of serial killers, which are sociopaths that, take it to the next logical step for a sociopath, And I use the word logic very liberally there. Every sociopath, and by extension, every psycho killer, has a story in their own mind, right? They're not the villain. They're not the bad guy. They're the victim. And you see that in the victimology of certain ideologies and certain propaganda that we see in this day and age. And suffice to say that, lots of them, including the Zodiac Killer, killed his victims to be slaves to him in the afterlife. So, it's a natural extension for Boss to have a desire to enslave people so that they will be his slaves in this life and the life to come. People like this are creepy. And we write books about them and glorify serial killers, but I consider these people predators. And, wolves are great predators, and they're cute, and they absolutely have a part in our ecology, and I'm not in favor of, ranchers and such in the West that remove them from nature because it causes starvation and weakness and death and hurt animals. And they are definitely part of the web of life. I don't know if I really feel that sociopaths are a natural part of nature in human beings. To me, that's more in the mosquito category. In fact, in the Swamp Castle series that I'm doing in parallel with this one, I'm pretty sure you're going to hear a story that I wrote at one point called Last of a Kind, where, sociopaths are basically weeded out of the gene pool. Eugenics, but instead of it being on black people or the unintelligent, it's done with sociopaths. There's another story I wrote called Waiting for the Monsters to Die, where the aliens basically flat out say, you either fix this part of your genome or you're not getting off the planet. And I would argue that this strain of humanity is possibly why aliens haven't contacted us yet, if alien abduction stories and all the stuff that goes on with UFOs is real, right? Because if you're an advanced species, why would you fuck around with a bunch of monkeys that might stab you on any given Tuesday? Culturally speaking, there's still a ton of evolution we need to have, right? We need governments that actually help our people. We need to develop institutions that provide for the weakest among us and provide opportunity for the young instead of stealing their futures. And I'm doing other series in the podcast about that. But the thing is that in addition to the need to reform our culture and reform our government, the fact of the matter is that there is, in every human being, a chance to do evil and commit murder under the right circumstances. But with some of us, it is far easier than others. And I think I show that well in this chapter.